Okay, so I'm going to be talking about the Iranian protests or what might end up turning into the Iranian Revolution. But today, yeah, friends waiting for me outside. So obviously, if you're, well, actually, you could be completely oblivious to what's going on to Iran because there's pretty much a complete news blackout going on that, and that in itself is kind of telling because that tells you who benefits and who does not benefit from the results of this. So understand a little bit about what's going on with Iran. Iran originally was a Middle Eastern country there that was more or less aligned with the West, was friendly to them. This is after an installation of the Shah of Iran following World War II. But basically, he was put in place to be friendly to British and American interests, also help keep the oil flowing to Europe, which has no real source of oil. I probably shouldn't let these guys to my rear. Go forward a little. So Iran was basically looked at as the primary way of keeping the Soviets out of the Middle East. Now, Iran ended up having a very shallow establishment because of the issues of uh, when you set up a monarchy, you basically have limited ability for people to move up and fill out your. You have limited ability for people to move up and fill out your establishment. That's what makes an establishment brittle. But when you're installing a government to be friendly to you, that's generally the best outcome you want because you don't want them to be able to change your government relatively easily. And the Shah was kind of a really interesting mixed bag because on one hand, he showed lots of liberal tendencies, especially towards allowing women to behave in a more Western manner. And he was pretty much slowly implementing Western reforms as he went along. On the flip side, though, because he had such a thin establishment, he wasn't in a position to allow any form of political uh, rivalry in his country. So the idea of opposition parties and such really didn't exist. So he was very brutal on anyone that was essentially counter to the type of system he had set up. And the two groups that were most counter to his setup were Islamicists and communists, as neither one of those guys like to share power with you when you. So it's not like you can have a mixed power government with either one of those groups. And so pretty much everyone was kind of content to let things go that way until President Jimmy Carter came along and he thought he could make the United States look better to the world if we championed human rights everywhere in the world. Well, the problem is you're basically violently stomping down communists and Islamicists. You don't have a good-looking human rights record. And so essentially, Carter looked at what was going on in Iran, and they had a sizable establishment that would basically through their religious establishment, which would allow them to basically set up an Islamist government with minimal turmoil. And so the Carter administration deliberately allowed Ayatollah Khomeini to return to the country, knowing the results were going to be. But he believed Khomeini was sufficiently anti-communist enough where they could have a functional relationship. His take was that Khomeini was far more anti-communist than he was anti-West, and what we ended up discovering, of course, is that Khomeini was equally anti-communist and anti-West. So what ends up happening is massive destabilization. Uh, Theocratic government takes over, and so we end up with the government we're looking at now. Now, one of the things that is always kind of strange is the idea of how Iran fit into the globalist community. So, on one hand, you have everything the globalists should hate. Essentially, they're ultra Persian nationalists. Um, they're very close supporter of the biggest globalist boogeyman, Russia. Yet, at the same time, the globalists coddle them. Essentially, nuclear talks, they very rarely put any kind of pressure on them. At best, kind of slow rolling the process. Now, there's always a possibility, and I fully accept the idea that Iran, and I've never believed Iran is as close to building a bomb as Israel. That's anything they say about Iran's nuclear capability, at the minimum, propaganda. However, they may be even further away than we might even realize. And so I suspect that might be one possibility. But I think one of the big things in terms of keeping Iran on the playing field all this time was the idea that they really didn't want to see Israeli hegemony in the Middle East. So if we look at the people that the globalists really dislike more than anybody else, one of them, Russia being the main one, because Russia is far too much of a nationalist entity for the globalists to stand. They don't want to play games as part of the. They don't want to. They don't want to be part of the globalist setup. They wanted to be a co-equal partner, which was unacceptable. Israel is obviously somebody that the globalist order really hates. Um, and of course, the chunk of Europe which isn't completely on board with the whole idea of open borders is also part of the anti-globalist boogeyman that the globalists aren't fond of. Now, oddly, two countries that should fit the bill in terms of the globalists not liking but are fully willing to turn a blind eye to are China and Iran. Now, China's a little bit more easy to understand because basically everybody kind of went all in on this idea of, well, gee, if we just, let China build all our stuff for us, if we move all the factories over there, eventually China is going to liberalize because, as their economy gets bigger and bigger and bigger, they're just going to have no choice but to turn into a liberal globalist entity like the rest of us. And it took people forever to realize that China wasn't playing that game. China was using the whole system as leverage and wasn't planning on changing it all, other than maybe a few alterations to basically going from a purely communist style system to more of a mercantilist system. Iran is the real oddball here because if you look at Iran, Iran should have been a total pariah because it didn't fit either narrative. You couldn't look at them and say, "Oh well, they're, someday they're going to liberalize and come along on board," because they definitely weren't going to liberalize and come on board uh, as a Islamic theocratic state. So it doesn't make any sense. But somehow they didn't they were able to not be noticed as much by the global order. Oh, I left it on all day. Okay. Uh, so the question is the current Iranian situation going to end up turning into overthrowing the government? And I'm thinking probably not. For the most part, people's rebellions don't work well because you have to have an establishment in order to make it all run. So unless there is some kind of anti-theocratic establishment that's already kind of in place, it's not going to happen. Now that anti-theocratic establishment may exist, but the problem is Iran is such a black box. It's really hard to see anything else that's going on in it. And considering how authoritarian they've been, it's hard to imagine that exists. So from my point of view, to me, this looks very similar to a color revolution. Now, it's not the globalist kind that we were dealing with under the Bushes, Obamas, and Bidens. This one is pretty much hatched by, call it a mega color revolution, which means that it has the intention of being uh, nationalist in the end, or at least not beneficial to the globalist order. Too late to go up there. So, looking at the video of the protest, things look pretty good. But the problem being is it's really, really hard to gauge how much we're seeing because they've got a lot of what they're doing. We're getting very limited content. So although I think it's real, it's not. I don't think it's fabricated. There's no way to tell how really hard or widespread it is. So we don't know how much it can take effect. Um, for it to work is the security forces have to peel away. And to a certain extent, the security forces have to be getting assurances from some other level of the government, another faction of the establishment that tells us or that tells them that it's safe to do this without fear of getting killed when it's all over. If all they're hearing is the establishment saying, you guys got to keep going at this no matter what, and if you don't kill them we're going to kill you, you don't have a revolution. So we don't know what's happening. uh in terms of other things that are not really giving me good vibes on this, I saw initially there was a bunch of pictures that popped up out there, kind of, I thought was pretty cool at first. It's several Iranian women with pictures of the current leadership on fire, lighting their cigarettes from the burning picture. And I said, "Oh, that's some good advertising. That's good marketing there." But apparently, those aren't organic. Some of them are from years ago. They're not from inside Iran. They're from outside. The most famous one is actually Canadian from 2 years ago. She may be an Iranian national protesting, but it doesn't tell us what's going on inside. And the fact that that suddenly got huge amounts of traction inside says other people outside Iran are trying to basically push this as something that's going to be beneficial to them. So it looks to me like this is more push from the outside than inside. Not saying that the Iranian people aren't busting their asses and trying really hard, but it's hard to make a revolution pull off without establishment backing. Uh, I think this has been being set up throughout the entire Trump administration. First, we saw that Iran's proxies were destroyed throughout the Middle East, which basically cut back their influence significantly. Their base in Syria is pretty much gone, uh, which really was a major setback. Uh, then we saw where Israel did that strike on Iran, and the Iranians retaliated by firing this huge barrage of missiles. And actually, this starts making a little bit more sense now because uh, at the time the media, and I did a video on this, at the time the media was coming up with this crackpot idea that the Iranians deliberately launched a missile strike designed to fail, which made no damn sense whatsoever. But the thing is the missile strike failed horribly, and again, this was very much a slam to Iran, making them look pretty foolish. I believe that strike was designed to get a result like that or similar in order to make it basically embarrass the Iranian regime so that some bait here. I'll check my traps quick. All right. So yeah, that missile strike had a huge impact on the gravitas of Iran. It made them look foolish and weak. And I think the strike on their nuclear facilities that the United States performed was meant to do the exact same thing. I honestly do not believe Iran was anywhere near to making a nuclear device, but we suddenly jumped on the bandwagon as an opportunity to do this. And I think what it was, if you listen to essentially the narrative before that, was that, oh, well, all these facilities are completely, absolutely untouchable. There's nothing anyone could ever possibly do to them. But then uh, we go in and basically hit this facility and basically set them back. Now, maybe they were 10 years away and we made them end up 15 years away, but uh, but I think it was meant to be a huge hit, demoralize the government and make them look weak to the people by showing that their facilities could be hit and taken out anytime it was desired to do so. Now, another thing that's in play here is what's been going on with Venezuela. The pressure being put up, Venezuela's been being has been acting as a clearing house for Iranian oil. Essentially, they've been sending out tankers half full of Venezuelan oil, which is sellable on the market, and then mixing it with Iranian or Russian oil, which is sanctioned, and basically allowing all sides to make money off the deal. A lot of the reason the pressure was put on a lot of the reason the pressure was put on them in the first place, in my opinion, on Venezuela was to disrupt money going to Iran. Iran's economic system has been really borderline. They're really pushed to the limits, and any impact on their the amount of money coming in is going to be horrendously negative to them. And even the idea of uh, the fact that they're they have to look around for potential different sources when no such sources exist probably helped push their economy over the edge. If you're not aware, their currency devalued massively over this year, and that's part of how these protests kicked off in the first place. Another thing that's ongoing, and I don't know if outside forces had anything to do with this, I haven't heard otherwise, but the capital of Tehran pretty much is out of fresh water. They've bled the aquifer, they've bled whatever reservoirs they have, and they're actually talking about moving the capital to the coast and setting up desalination plants. So that doesn't bode well for them. But so I guess the synopsis is I don't think uh, I don't think this is going to turn into a revolution in the end. However, I would say it's going to put them one step closer to regime change because their legitimacy is deeply wrecked right now. Now the thing is people say, well, any kind of revolt's got to be good, right? And I saying, well, that's not necessarily true because uh, when you have revolutions, so-called people's revolutions that occur uh, in a country that has a weak establishment, and theocracy isn't the worst establishment they've had, but it's not strong. So what ends up happening is if that if a people's revolt topples a government that has a weak establishment, it is possible to actually get worse results. Good examples being the French Revolution, USSR, and China. So, what could be worse than a theocracy? Well, there are communists there. They could take over. Um, who knows? Maybe a form of nationalism that's far more detrimental than what we're used to. I hope the government gets toppled. That I would like to see that because the Iranians deserve some form of freedom, but I'm leaning against it happening. Um, and I think what happens is this sets the stage for a counter establishment to start building. Uh, in the long run, Iran not being a theocratic dictatorship is beneficial to the entire region. So, yeah, I would definitely like to see it go that way. All right, and I'll do some regular videos without the game. I just was using this as a method to see if I could do this faster with without a whole lot of preliminary stuff. All right. Thank you for spending time with me this evening. Hope to see you again in a future video.